Footnotes have long been the bane of many a designer's existence. How to make them, how to format them, how to keep them near the text they refer to. Microsoft Word makes footnotes easy, so people figure that InDesign should too. Of course, there's a big difference between a word processing program and a page layout program. That said, InDesign CS3 does make footnotes pretty easy, as long as you don't want to do anything too fancy. Let's see how to add a footnote. First, I need my type tool, and then click on the text wherever I want to add my footnote. Then I go to the Type menu and choose Insert Footnote. It's as simple as that. If you can see this down at the bottom of the screen, the cursor is flashing where the footnote is going to be placed. I'll zoom in on that place by pressing Command 2 on the Mac or Control 2 on Windows. Now I can type my footnote, whatever I want it to be. Here is my footnote. There you go. Now, don't worry about the fact that it looks really ugly here. We'll deal with formatting later. In the meantime, let me just add one more footnote. How about I'll add it right after this text. So I'll click up there, click Type, Insert Footnote, and I'll type, I don't know. There you go. And we can see that the footnote reference marker, that little 2, was added right there, and the footnote was added at the bottom of the column. If you're not sure where a footnote reference marker is in the text, because it's easy to lose track of those things, here's a little trick. Place your cursor inside the footnote, then go up to the Type menu and choose Go to Footnote Reference. The cursor immediately jumps right back up to that reference mark. Here's one more footnote trick that you should know about. Footnotes appear in the Story Editor. You know how much I love the Story Editor. So I'm going to go to the Edit menu and choose Edit in Story Editor. And you can see that all the footnotes show up right in place in your text story. Here's the text, and then here's the footnote. If I click on this little blue area, it condenses it so that I don't have to look at the whole footnote. If I click again, I can actually see it, and I can type in here. And you can see that as soon as I edit this, it updates down here as well. I'll close the Story Editor so it's easier to see that. Great, we've added some footnotes. Now it's time to format them. We could apply formatting right here. For example, I could select that and change it to italic or whatever you want. You can apply formatting directly onto the footnote itself, but if you're trying to change the feel of all the footnotes in your document, it's much better to use your document formatting options. I'm going to move this page over so we can see our footnotes while the dialog box is open, and I'll choose from the Type menu, Document Footnote Options. There we go. So here's our dialog box, and here's our footnotes. And this is where we control all the look and feel, the formatting of our footnote, and make it look pretty. There's all kinds of options here. For example, we can choose, do we want numbers, or symbols, or letters, or stars? I'm going to leave this set to numbering for right now. You can say, what number do you want it to start at? Do you want it to restart at every page, change over every section, and so on? In this case, no, I'm just going to let it increment throughout the entire document. You can also say, do you want to show a prefix or a suffix around the reference? That means, do you want something before or after the number up here or down here? In fact, I'm going to change this to both reference and text. I'm going to add, let's say, a bracket before it and a bracket after it. And you can see that because my preview checkbox is turned on, you'll see these changes happen in real time. So I've added brackets around those. You can change it to anything you want, really. Now we get down to the formatting itself. Do we want to apply formatting to the footnote reference number in the text itself? For example, right now it's set to superscript. We could also say apply subscript, or just leave it alone, apply normal. I'm going to leave it set to superscript, and if I had some character style that I wanted to apply to that, let's say make it color or change the font or something, I could choose that here. The footnote formatting applies to the footnotes at the bottom of the column, and in this case you're applying a paragraph style. I have a paragraph style in this document called footnotes, so I'll choose that out of this pop-up menu, and we can see that immediately that style is applied to the text. I could choose any paragraph style I want or make my footnote style any way I want. I just happen to make it look like this. There's a lot of space between the footnote number over here and the text. In fact, it's actually a tab, and we could change the width of that tab by editing the footnote paragraph style, but in this case, I'm just going to change this and not have a tab. Instead, I'll erase that and change it to an M space. That way it'll be a little bit closer. We only have an M space between those. So you have a lot of control about how the footnote looks. But we're not done. Let's switch over to the Layout tab of the Footnote Options dialog box, and we have even more control here. For example, the amount of space before or between footnotes. And in this case, I want to add some space. This text down here is too close to the line, so I'm going to make there be a minimum space before the first footnote, maybe 2 picas, something like that. And you can see that now it creates a buffer zone between the text and that line. First baseline is a little bit of a misnomer. This is really more like how much space do you want between each footnote. For example, if I change the offset to cap height, you can see that these get very, very tight. Basically, here they're getting pushed up against each other because the full height of the footnote is only the size of a capital letter. So I'm not sure why you'd want to do that, but isn't it nice that you can? There you go. We'll just change this back to leading and move on. Now, this next checkbox, place end of story footnotes at bottom of text, a lot of people misunderstand this. They think this means that this will place all their footnotes at the end of their story. In other words, create endnotes. And unfortunately, InDesign does not have an endnotes feature. It only has footnotes. This will not place your footnotes at the end of the story. In fact, this only applies to the footnotes at the end of the story. That is, the footnotes on the last page of your story. And this says, do you want your footnotes to be all the way at the bottom of the column, or do you want them to be flush up against the bottom of the story, if the story doesn't go all the way to the bottom of the column? That's what that's about. In this case, it's not really relevant, so I'll leave that off. Allow split footnotes tells InDesign whether or not a single footnote, let's say you have a really long footnote, like a whole paragraph, is it okay to split that across 2 columns if it needs to? And if you turn this on, it will split that across, but only if it needs to. Now, what about that rule? This big, thick 1-point rule? 1-point rules are ugly, far too thick. Let's go ahead and change this to maybe a half-point rule. And we could change the type if we wanted to make it, let's say, dotted. The main thing I'm going to do here is move it up a little bit with the offset. So I'll place my cursor in this field, and then I'll just use the arrow keys to move it up and down. Let's say move it up to about 3 points. That just gives a little bit more breathing room above the footnote. Finally, I'll click OK, and I'm good to go. Of course, footnotes will update automatically. Let's say I add some text here, and suddenly I'm on the next page. Well, this stays number 2, but the footnote now is at the bottom of this column, not the first column. I've already mentioned that you can't do endnotes in InDesign, but there's actually a lot of other limitations to footnotes in InDesign as well. For example, you can't straddle 2 columns. Let me show you an example of this. Let's take this away so we can actually get 2 footnotes again. If I have a long footnote, let's just add a bunch of random text here. If I had a really long footnote here, and this text frame had 2 columns, so I'll go to the Object menu and choose Text Frame Options. We saw how to do this in an earlier movie. And I'll change this to, let's say, 2 columns with 1 pica 10 between. Click OK. And you can see now that each footnote is only 1 column wide. There's no way to tell InDesign to make a footnote go across both columns. That's a limitation. A lot of people want to do that, but there's just no way to do that in InDesign at this time. We're actually seeing another limitation of footnotes in InDesign. See this text that's sitting over here? Shouldn't it be wrapping around this? Shouldn't it be forced out of here? Well, in InDesign, there's no such thing as text wrap with footnotes. That's a problem. Let me undo this, go back to a 1 column, and you'll really see it here. The footnote goes right into the graphic. There's no way to put your footnotes in the margin instead of the bottom of the column. It's always going to go in the bottom of the column. There's no way to create different styles for different kinds of notes. For example, you can't have one numbered footnote and then on the same page have an asterisk footnote. You know, ultimately, Adobe FrameMaker is still the king of footnotes, and it does all kinds of long document features better than InDesign. But InDesign is catching up as it adds more of these kinds of features with every new version. But even with these various limitations, InDesign's footnotes do offer plenty to keep most document creators happy.